experienced by Moses, the creation of the world. But anyway, that took a long time. So stop here. Well, I just sum up. I might as well. I might have a bit of more room here. I don't know how much. I just add a small note for Aristotle. Well, okay. So for Abraham, it seems that, according to Maimonides, God was like a mover. It was like he moved the heavens. He had like an axe, like an axe in the hand of an axeman. For some people, like Ezekiel, for Moses, the name of God was El Shaddai, or necessarily existent. It was meant as a proof that God exists. And for Ezekiel, it seems like God was like the rider of a chariot or a captain of a ship. And for some people, Maimonides says God was a created light. Or some people, God was God was the creator of the world. Maimonides, one in the Mishnah Torah, he says that the resurrection of the dead, like Jesus, I guess, would be the greatest miracle. But I think in the guide he said the creation of the world is the greatest miracle, because then everything else becomes possible. So the account of beginning is the most important thing. Also, but kind of the chariot, the story of Ezekiel, is everything depends on that also. So it's a view of God and its relation to the world. Maimonides gave the definition of God. According to the philosophers, God is the intellectual subject, the intellect, and the intellectually cognized object. And all these form one simple notion. This was the definition of God, although we cannot understand it because it forms one simple notion. Okay, and also that we cannot know God. God has no attributes, so we cannot know God. Man has attributes, like even life. When you say things like life or intelligence, relative to us and to God, you don't mean the same thing, because God is simple and it's immutable. That doesn't change at all, and outside time, because time measures change. And the necessary existence of Moses and prime mover of Abraham cannot be the same thing. But they're both immutable. I think there are different kinds of causes according to Aristotle. The prime mover is a cause is like an end, and the cause of the necessary existence is more a cause, like more as an efficient cause. So it's a different kind of cause. Aristotle had 6 causes, and 2 of them chance and free will reduced to the other causes, because Aristotle argued against free will. So these are different kinds of causes, gods discussed by Maimonides. And he felt that God could not be the spirit of the world also, because God's just separate. Maimonides again so God was separate. For Spinoza, again, like I said, God was immanent. We exist in God, and maybe he founded a new philosophy. And even though Kant criticized him, it's possible that Hegel and Fichte followed him, which I have to study Hegel more. I just read a summary of Hegel. I didn't have a chance to read much yet. And so the conceptions of God, it seems that Maimonides interpreted all the terms applying to God in the Old Testament or in the Bible as in a metaphorical way. He didn't take them literally, although it was a problem, because the Bible said that Moses saw God face to face, and for Maimonides that meant it was without the imagination. Also the order of prophecy, and there's other things. So conception of God. For Spinoza, God was a substance of infinite attributes, all having infinite, all being infinite magnitude. And God was also conceived to itself, although God was not really alive because it had no emotions and could not be expected to love us back. So it's really nature. So in a way, maybe humanity were gods, because for Spinoza, humanity were immortal. So that's Spinoza. For Kant didn't even know how to define God. He couldn't even, like I listed a lot of ideas here. Kant only says, okay, the only way we can define God is try and say that he is the ons realissimum, which means that he has the perfection, the perfect attribute, or positive attribute of every possible attribute that exists to infinity, to infinite perfection. So, for example, the idea of intelligence. Well, God has infinite intelligence, etc. And the only way to prove God exists is if we can link it to the necessary existent. Otherwise, we can't prove he exists. And Kant tried that in the ideal of pure reason, and he failed. Although even Marx might argue against that, because later on Marx said that in the canonic system, if you try and balance something, and then you add something else, and you balance that, well, the new thing might make the other one imbalanced, so then you have to change it. So even Kant's idea of God as having the extreme of each attribute might be inconsistent or inefficient, because having two attributes which are perfect, you add a third one, it might influence the other ones, and then they're no longer perfect. So you cannot, they might not be able to be infinite. You might need to balance them all out, so you have a consistent, perfect being. Also, in Averroes, the Muslim commentator, the commentator on Aristotle, says that an infinite magnitude is impossible, because the magnitude is either finite or magnitude is even or odd, but God cannot be either odd. By infinity cannot be even or odd. It's neither. So an infinite magnitude is impossible. But I think you can approach infinity. Or anything about God. Anyway, it is possible that God, the idea of God, may not be static, and it may be that God may be evolving and changing and going into greater and greater perfection, just like humanity is. Because my mind is called humanity. Long ago, it was in its age of infancy, because we made so much progress. Even the last 100 years alone, they say like 95% of mathematics was discovered. And 100 years ago, they wanted to close the patent office because they thought everything was invented. But so much was invented in the last 100 years alone. And also, the idea of religion. I mean, people lost faith in religion partly because really could have lost faith because of Maimonides even, but because of Kant, a lot of people lost faith in metaphysics. Even Hegel said he had to work in metaphysics, not for the money, but because there was a need for it. He even called his work the science of logic, and because otherwise you couldn't work after Kant. Kant destroyed metaphysics and philosophy, so there was no interest in God. And in religion, because of all the progress of science, of Newton and all that, which went against religion, and Darwin, people were losing interest in religion also, in God. So even a lot of people become existentialists, lost interest in theology. So Kaplan said that's why a lot of people became more depressed, or existentialist. Although many people try to find solutions, many try to find solutions to the problems they can't create. Where you have, especially Nietzsche's theory, which he tried to create art, and it's trying to perfect yourself in the world, and Searle's phenomenology, and Wittgenstein seems to create problems also. We cannot know things.